without any further ado, please put your hands together and welcome our speaker for this evening, Shaunaka Rishi.
In recent years, a new brand of evangelical atheism has emerged in Britain, and its high priests are articulate, literate, and media savvy. Coupled with what many religious people see as an increase in the exclusion of religion from public sight and discourse, traditional religion in the UK feels under attack. Where do Hindus stand in this national debate? Although we don't hear much from the Hindu community in the UK, we can explore the ideas of theism and atheism and the rationale behind them, as discussed by Krishna and Arjuna. So we'll really limit it to the Bhagavad Gita, but the Bhagavad Gita does say quite a lot, so it's not as limited. So, as I kind of said, there is a national debate going on about this, and people aren't really, the Hindu community isn't engaged in that debate. So the debate is a Christian atheist debate. Every now and then a Jew might pop up, but other than that, there's not much else going on, not much being said. And I don't see why that has to be the case. I don't see why the community doesn't engage in national debates and doesn't form a voice and contribute to these things, because I think the community has a lot to say. And atheism and theism is a very modern discussion. Yes, so the issues of atheism and theism, they're reflecting some of the essential questions, very essential questions being asked. Is there or isn't there a God? Is there or isn't there a something behind the everything? So this is something that has engaged people on this planet since time immemorial. We see many manifestations of religion, many manifestations of spirituality, and many manifestations of people reacting to it. And what I find interesting, and what Indian thinkers thousands of years ago found interesting, was everyone is engaged in discussion about God. And everyone is taking a side, one way or the other. But the interesting thing is that the big thing on the table is the concept of God. And that hasn't been taken off the table of discussion. So it's a continuous discussion. The essence, in one sense, of the discussion, philosophically, for Greek philosophers, for Indian philosophers particularly, came down to what is real. What's reality? And it's kind of, lots of definitions of this. And it's the temporary changing realities of everyday life, birth, death, disease, old age, all these things that we go through. Or is there something spiritual? Is there something that lasts beyond this temporary body? Because we all know the body has a shelf life, and after that it has to be thrown away. It has no function anymore. So, is there or isn't there a God becomes an issue, and the answer to these questions radically transforms our lives. If we say there is a God, then you have to find out who is this person, what is the energy, what is the injunction. If that person exists, if there's a person who exists, who owns and controls everything, it may be good to get to know them, because everything we have is borrowed. So, it's important to have a relationship of some kind. If that person doesn't exist, then it's just clubbing all the way, really. So you can do whatever you like, because there are no rules and regulations, because there's no one regulating or ruling. So we can just make it up as we go along. So however you approach this, it radically changes our approach to life, and how our purpose in life, how we understand it, how we behave towards others, how we feel about ourselves, etc. There are three possible conclusions, classically, in both Western and Indian philosophy. Very simply put, that what we see is all there is. Everything ends with death. There's no concept of God. Just what you see is what you get. When you're dead, you're dead. No point in worrying about, speculating about, etc. And the Greek word for God is theos. And a means not. Atheos means not God. Very simple. Second one is, yes, there is more than meets the eye. There's a spiritual reality underpinning it all. There's something that exists that's greater than ourselves. Eternality exists. Everything isn't just temporary. And that's either a personal or impersonal, whatever it is, there's an energy that's greater than us. And that is theos, God. So theistic, atheistic. That's where the words come from in English. And the other one is, I don't know. Just can't figure it out. Or I can't know. Because if you say there is such a big thing like that, how, me being a very small thing, how would I ever understand it anyway? So I can't know. And gnosis is the Greek word for knowing. So gnosis, agnostic, not knowing. So these are the three Greek words. We've heard the words theist, atheist, and agnostic. And so this is from kind of Western philosophical perspective. It's the same in the Indian conclusions. It's the same three positions. There's not much in the middle. And it's very interesting because normally you get a little bit more variety. But in this discussion, it's fairly, you're either on one side or the other side, or you're in the middle. There's nowhere else to go, really. So it's an interesting discussion, and that's why it's so dynamic. That's why it's been going on for such a long time. And you can ask me at some stage what the answer is, but we'll go into it first. Atheism, theism in Hindu tradition, the whole idea of what's real is discussed an awful lot. It's the basis of discussion. And that's what, for me, made Indian philosophy so interesting. It dealt with the very basic issues in a very broad and open way. They give us examples of what's real and what's not real. Clearly, there are always people who will interpret reality theistically or atheistically. Hindus are no exception to this. The theists fall into two main categories in Indian thought. One is that God has a face. All Hindus recognize Brahman as the spiritual reality underpinning everything, if you're a theist. That there is a spiritual energy that is not material. That's a basic theistic understanding. That's your starting point. Most traditions, majority of traditions, understand Brahman to be personal. Krishna, Shiva, Durga, and many other manifestations. So you go into a temple, a home, and there's a personal representation of a deity. So they see the Supreme as a person. And that's important to them. If not, it's a central part of their life with whom they have an eternal connection. So, and people will talk about their Ishtadev. Of all the devas that you could be worshipping, people have a specific attraction. And it could be a number of people, shall we say. You could have a Krishna Bhakta who also has a tremendous affection for Hanuman and recites the Hanuman Chalisa because it helps him in his devotion to Krishna. Or you could have a Ram Bhakta who also has a great affection for Ganesh. He's such a nice kind of a cuddly looking chap. And they're from different traditions, but these are personal things. I had a young girl, I act as Hindu chaplain in the university. I had a young girl come in and she was talking to me and I asked her who's her Ishtadev and she said Shiva. And I was pleased that she was so clear about it. And this is something, her family are not Shaivites. This is just something that helped her in her life. Her parents went through difficulties early on in their marriage, a lot of rows in the house, a lot of upset, and she just took shelter of Shiva because she saw Lord Shiva with Parvati and Ganesh and Kuvera and a nice family scene. So she thought, well, he can be my father. This is just her. She took shelter, and this became her Ishtadev. And it's a very personal thing. You can't, you're not going to dissuade her from her affection for Lord Shiva. So this is a very personal relationship. The other theistic aspect is God doesn't have a face. So some think that Brahman is an impersonal spiritual reality beyond Krishna, beyond Shiva, beyond Durga. And that there's no possibility of relationship, as ultimately there aren't two, because there's only one. We are a part of that Brahman, and therefore the idea of relationship is a material concept. It's not very profound. So, and it takes two to tango. But here you are Brahman, and this is the only complete oneness. So in both senses, either you are related to God, you're part of God, or you are God, but both are theistic concepts. So that's kind of the schools of atheism. You don't get this kind of pluralism within the Abrahamic traditions. If you're a theist, you're just a theist, and there's personal God, and that's it. There's no other discussion about it. But there's different levels of understanding of God, personal and impersonal. These are the two main theistic denominations, or kind of ways of seeing God in Hindu thought. Among atheists, in one sense, you could say that in Orthodox Hinduism there aren't atheists, but kind of there are. There are Vaisheshikas, people who follow a certain philosophy called Vaisheshika. There's people who follow a philosophy called Sankhya, and not all of them are atheists, but some of them are. Some of the Vaisheshikas are atheists. But there are others who kind of fall outside of Hinduism, but they're still somehow attached. These are typically the Charvakas, the Nashtikas, the Lokayatikas. These are famous groups recognized as materialists and pop up regularly in texts. Actually, let me give you, because you may not be very acquainted with their teachings, here's some quotations from Charvaka teachings. And you may find that these very accurately reflect modern atheistic or secular kind of perception. There is no heaven or final liberation, nor any soul or any other world, nor do the actions of the four castes, orders produce any effect. The Agnihotra of the Vedas, the ascetics, the smearing oneself with ashes, were all made by nature as the livelihood of those destitute of knowledge and manliness, which means the Brahmins. And then it goes on. While life remains, let a man live happily. Let him feed on ghee, even though he runs into debt. Beg, borrow, or steal, but eat ghee. Which means you've got one life, just enjoy it to the max. Don't worry, forget about dharma. Just whatever you do, just constantly eat ghee, because it's nice. When once the body comes to ashes, how can it ever return again? If he who departs from the body goes to another world, how is it that he does not come back again, restless for love of his kindred? So they're dismissing life after death. Hence it is only as a means of livelihood that Brahmins have established here all the ceremonies for the dead. There is no other fruit anywhere. The three authors of the Vedas were buffoons, knaves, and demons. All the known formula of the Pandits and all the obscene rites commanded by the Ashvamedya, those were invented by buffoons. And so all the various kinds of presents to priests is all useless. So there you go. That's they could be saying that about the Christian churches or the mosques or the synagogues. Same kind of argument thousands of years ago. So this all has existed in Indian culture and has been recognized. And we know that this exists because this particular quotation was taken down by Madhvacharya in the 12th century. This was him responding to this philosophy that existed. So, and how atheism is mentioned in the Mahabharata. The Book of the Forest, Yudhisthira, is set a question by a yaksha, famous set of questions. One set of questions is, what man should be called learned? Who is called an atheist? Who is called stupid? What causes desire? What is envy? And Yudhisthira's answers were all correct according to the yaksha. He said, one who knows dharma is learned. A stupid person is called an atheist. An atheist is called stupid. And then he goes on and answers the other. But it's quite clear where he stands on that. In the Ramayana, the second book, the Ayodhya-kand, Ram is visited by Bharat, who tells him of the death of Dhritarashtra. So Bharat comes and visits him in the forest. And he laments. And then a Brahmin, a Nashtika Brahmin. Now, the word for atheist in the Mahabharata is Nashtika. And here in the Ramayana is also Nashtika. Jabali is this person. He tries to console Ram. He sees he's very upset, so he tries to console him. And he says, indulge in priceless royal pleasures and enjoy yourself in Ayodhya, prince. like someone from heaven. Dashrath was nobody to you. You are nobody to him. The king was just one person. You are another. Do as I am urging. And accept the idea once and for all, high-minded prince, that there exists no world to come. Address yourself to what can be perceived and turn your back on what cannot. So this is a Brahmin, learned guy. So it's not that Brahmins were all theists. And Ram says, what you have said in the hope of pleasing me is wrong, and only a semblance of right. It is harm that simulates help. It looks like help. What you consider the best course of action is in fact ignoble. The statements you make urging me to do what is good for me are mere sophistry. So he's saying, this is not noble talk. You're not saying something that's enlivening, enlightening. So this was Ram's response to Nashtika philosophy. So there is a trail. Now the Upanishads very clearly talk about the fact that there is a spiritual reality. They observed the world without and within and concluded that the temporary physical self was underpinned by another aspect of the self, which is eternal. So in the Gita starts its teachings at exactly that point, picks up on this point. So Krishna launches, and it's very interesting because Krishna doesn't start teaching in a soft way. He says exactly what he wants to say and then kind of just mentions other things. But his main point, the foundation, the spiritual foundation, he makes right from the get-go. So in chapter 2, text 12, Na tuevaham jatunasam, na twam na mejanadipa, na chaiva na bhavishava, sarvevayam atak param. Never was there a time, Arjuna, when you did not exist, nor all these kings, nor in the future will any of us cease to be. So it's a very simple text, one of my favorite philosophical texts of all time. Because he's saying a couple of things. One of them, but the important one just for now, is he's echoing what the Upanishads have already discussed and concluded. He's saying that you have an eternal aspect. He's shaking Arjuna's tree. He's saying you're lamenting for what is not worthy of grief, because this isn't who you are. Now let's look at the big picture. Let's get the big picture. So he's kind of expanding Arjuna's consciousness. So it's a very important starting point, and I want to come back to that as we go on. And there's another text, 2:16. Na sate vijite bhavo, na bhavo vijite sata, ubayor api drishto nichas tvanayas tattva darshipi. Those who are seers of the truth have concluded of the non-existent, which is the material, there is no endurance. It's called non-existent. It's so material. It's so, in the light of eternity, our 70-year stint on this planet doesn't mean anything, because eternity has no beginning and no end. So 70 years is like, it's less than that, in fact. So it's considered non-existent. There's no endurance to the body. There's no endurance to the mind. There's no endurance to this table. We know for a fact there's no endurance to any piece of technology. We've all experienced that. So there's no endurance to these things. And of the eternal, there is no change. It's always existing. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. Now this again goes back to older teachings. Again goes back to Upanishadic and even Vedic teaching. So there's a very consistent line that has come down through Hinduism. Hinduism is a very difficult thing to grasp. Put your hand on it, all looks very cultural and it's kind of made up by families and stuff. But philosophically, there's a very straight line, a number of straight lines, in fact, that you can trace that are very consistent. So atheism and theism in the Gita. Let's focus on the Gita for a bit. I see two forms of atheism in the Gita. One is expressed by Arjuna. That's a little bit of a shock. And I call that soft atheism. And then there's a hard atheism discussed. The soft atheism is, we can describe it more as forgetfulness. Arjuna, he comes onto the battlefield, he's poised between the two armies, he sees everyone he loves, and he just becomes totally overwhelmed by emotions. So his intellect becomes overwhelmed by emotions, his determination, his decision-making processes. It's just an emotional reaction. He just looks at everyone and says, "Oh, I can't kill these people. I can't do this. Life just isn't worth living. This isn't." And he just has a breakdown. He sees only causes of grief in his situation. Now, we've all experienced that in life, where life just comes to a point and you just don't know. You look right and left, and it's just doom, and your limbs go weak, and your mouth gets dry, and you just, oh God, I'm dead. Everyone's going to think I'm a prat. Maybe I am a prat. Oh God, and such like. He thinks that all he sees before him is all that there is, and that's the issue that Krishna is addressing. So he has his vision of reality. As I say, we're discussing what's real. His vision of what's real has shrunk to the battlefield, has shrunk to the people he sees before him. He's not seeing anything else. And Krishna has actually become invisible to him. Other possibilities have become invisible. He doesn't actually see them. And that is in itself a form of atheism. It's a shrunken vision. And this is actually ultimately how the Gita continues to describe this. Uncharacteristically, we see Arjuna acting like Duryodhana. That's a shocking revelation. But anyway, we read Duryodhana's confident calculations about the strength of his army over his enemy. Krishna came to Duryodhana and showed him a partial manifestation of the universal form, showing him that I am the supreme, and begging him not to fight. So he's saying, I'm the supreme, but he still made his calculations, not putting into his calculations that Krishna is God. So hang on a minute. Oh, I don't have God in my army. That's not good. That's a kind of a big one, That's like, you're on a dice board and some card is worth 10 times more than the rest. Well, it's one of those cards. So he didn't see Krishna in his calculations. He forgot him. But Arjuna, in this instance, did exactly the same thing. He also made his calculations and again didn't see Krishna. So it is a form of atheism. It is forgetfulness of the Supreme. So there's no God, Theos, in the reality that he has constructed for himself. It's lacking God, and therefore it's desolate. It's all dependent on him, and if it's all dependent on me, I am doomed. That's his conclusion. And in actual fact, of course, he was right. That was the case. The interesting thing, of course, is that Arjuna did not reject Krishna. Duryodhana did. Arjuna turned to Krishna for help. Duryodhana didn't. And that's the difference in the two forms of atheism. One is simply forgetfulness, one is actually a rejection. And they're two different processes. So one person just forgot what reality was. So interesting. So I call that soft atheism. I think that's something that we do on a regular basis. Even if we consider ourselves theists, we just forget the God factor in our lives. In answer to Arjuna's understanding of the reality question, just before Krishna talks in 2.12, he explains to Arjuna that he is in 2.2. He says very, very straightforwardly for a counseling session, he just says, you're wrong. Right? So he falls apart. He just, oh God, help me. Well, the first thing, you're totally wrong, right? You've totally lost perspective. How you're speaking, how you're acting is not befitting a noble person, an Aryan. You're not acting like an Aryan. You're acting like a Wali, basically. So by saying that, he's saying the other as well. It's cowardly and it's impotent. He calls him a eunuch. Now he's a warrior. How did you feel like being called a eunuch? I mean, if you're not a warrior, how do you feel like being called a eunuch? So it's fairly, he's really shaking his tree. And it's a petty weakness of heart. Not only is it a weakness of heart, but it's petty. It's really unbecoming. It's not a good look. So Krishna. And your words sound learned, but they're not. Asochanam vasochastvam. You don't sound good at all. So, because by saying that, you're speaking learned words, but But he's saying, but they're not learned words. That's telling him he's a fool. So that's his harsh feedback. And he goes right from 2.2 right up to 2.11, and then in 2.12, right after just totally dismantling him. So he has a breakdown. What do? You give the man sympathy, encouragement, pat in the back, rub his back for him and say, "Oh, Arjuna, you're right." But he doesn't. He just tells him, "You're a eunuch. You're weak. You're pathetic." It's totally ignoble. Who's this? Is it you, my friend? But then he does something that, if the rest of us take that line, we can't do. He gives him a dose of reality, and he immediately says, "Natueva hamjatunasam." You and everyone around here, we're eternal by nature. So he's taking his shrunken reality and is expanding it for him. This is the significance of this. And he expands his. Now let's look at what I would term hard atheism in the Gita. And we see this in the 16th chapter. The 16th chapter is a presentation of this. In fact, most of the 16th chapter is about atheism, not about theism. And it's presenting what is an atheist and what is a theist actually as well. Krishna divides people into suras, which means godlike. Remember theos? And asuras, which is asura, not godlike. Atheos. Same words practically. So there's two paths that we can tread. One is the Sura Sampad, the other is the Asura Sampad. And that's what the 16th chapter is about. And it's about what kind of qualities are you developing as a person? What kind of choices are you making in life? So you have a choice to make, but let's be very clear that if you choose this Sura Sampad, these are the virtues you'll end up with. If you choose the Asura Sampad, this is the lack of virtue you'll end up with. And atheism is described more as a temporary forgetfulness of Krishna. Atheism there, it's not a temporary forgetfulness of Krishna, but it's a dogged pursuit of self-interest. It's a choice that we've made. So it's not just a wobbly moment that Arjuna's had. It's not just a moment of depression or kind of falling into kind of, oh God, just forgot everything. But it's actually a conscious choice that we make. Reality has become centered on a small picture, ourselves. The person in the mirror becomes the center of the universe and not anybody else. So other people aren't as important, community isn't important, family isn't important, the nation isn't important, the world isn't important, damn the environment, because once I'm dead, it's not, as long as the world doesn't come to an end before I die, I'll just throw litter everywhere and car pollutants and all that kind of stuff. It's the self in isolation from relationships, other relationships other than are serving me. So that's definitely not in relationship to Krishna. And where is this now? 16:6, yes. Krishna says, Arjuna, in this world there are two kinds of created beings. One is called the divine. One is called the demoniac. I have already explained to you at length the divine qualities. Now hear from me of the demoniac. And he says in the demoniac, pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance. These qualities belong to those of demoniac nature. And then he says, demoniac, the Asura, do not know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Neither cleanliness nor proper behavior nor truth is found in them. They say this world is unreal, there is no foundation, no God in control. They say it is produced of sex desire and has no cause other than lust. It's like get key. So just get girls, get boys, whatever it is. Just you go for the most desirable thing and just go for it. Following such conclusions, those who are lost to themselves, who have no intelligence, engage in unbeneficial, horrible works which will destroy the world. Taking shelter of their lust and absorbed in the conceit of pride and false prestige, they are thus illusioned and are always sworn to unclean work, attracted by the impermanent, attracted by the unreal. They believe that to gratify the senses is the prime necessity of human civilization. Thus, until the end of life, their anxiety is immeasurable. That's interesting, that by focusing on their own senses, they put themselves into anxiety. Bound by a network of hundreds of thousands of desires and absorbed in lust and anger, they secure money by illegal means for sense gratification. And it's interesting, why does the Inland Revenue have such stringent processes? The reason is because everyone tries to rip them off. Why does every bank have such stringent processes? It's not a matter of love and trust that you go in and you shake your bank manager's hand and, if you give me a loan and I'll give it back to you. His assumption is you're going to cheat him. That's how the world has been set up. That's why all these rules and regulations exist. So we're creating a world that is telling you, when you walk in to do business with someone, that my assumption is you're going to steal from my shop, you're going to rip off my business, you're going to do an insurance scam, and why do these businesses, why have they developed like this? Because that's what people do. So this seems to be talking about something that we experience on a regular basis. The Asura thinks, so much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and I will increase in the future more and more. He is my enemy, I have harmed him, and my other enemies will also be killed. I am the Lord of everything. I am the enjoyer. I am perfect, powerful, and happy. I am the richest man, surrounded by my relatives. There is none so powerful and happy as me. I shall perform sacrifices. I shall give charity, and thus I shall rejoice. Not irreligious, actually. It's interesting, because being religious is part of his self-image, that I'm a good guy. I give in charity. Al Capone ran soup kitchens. He ripped people off, he dealt in prostitution and drugs, and then he did soup kitchens. A little bit of balance in life. We all need a little bit of balance. So he was doing something of the Purusharthas. Self-complacent and always imprudent, deluded by wealth and false prestige, they sometimes proudly perform sacrifices in name only, without following the rules. Bewildered by ego, strength, pride, lust and anger, they become envious of God, who is situated in their own bodies and in the bodies of others, and blaspheme against religion. And it goes on and on like that. So, interesting. Yes, the Gita has something to say, but it's interesting how it frames the argument. It's not, it's not the same kind of atheism that we talk about in Western culture. It's a different kind of, it's a choice that you make that shrinks your view of reality. It creates a reality in which you can enjoy unlimitedly. Now, we can't enjoy unlimitedly as long as other people exist, because as soon as you bump into someone else, they're trying to enjoy as well, and you have to do some negotiation and develop some relationship. But if you just pretend that no one exists, just forget about the environment, so you shrink that much. Just forget about people who are awkward to you, you shrink that much. Just forget about family members who don't agree with you, you shrink that much. And our reality becomes very circumscribed. God is an imposition. The fact that God may or may not exist, if God exists, then I have to worship him in some way. Okay, so let's shrink that much. So you create a reality in which God can't exist. And that's interesting, because Krishna talks in the Gita about, he says, I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent, to these people, to the people on the Asura Sampad. For them I am covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I am unborn and infallible. He's saying that an Asura will never understand him, can't conceive that this is reality. Again in 9:11 he says, fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the supreme Lord of all that be. So they just reject God. So Krishna is acknowledging this as he goes through the Gita. He's telling Arjuna, someone who has chosen this path cannot see God because they have created a world in which God cannot be seen. They don't want to see God. It's a conscious choice that they make. So therefore they're limiting their own vision. And this is the issue of Asura and Sura. Asura is broadening the vision. Anything becomes possible. Everything becomes possible. So you open your mind up to see the bigger picture, always looking at the bigger picture. By looking at the bigger picture, you notice that, God, look how we're dealing with the planet. Wow. So you put yourself in the way of responsibility, of duty, of sacrifice, of challenge, of debt, of gratitude, of relationship. You're putting yourself in the way of all that. But that tends to curtail our ability to enjoy. If you put yourself in the way of all that, you won't put your parents in an old folks' home, which is happening more and more in society. Because why? Because they interfere with my ability to enjoy myself. There's no sense of gratitude or debt, or it becomes diminished, etc. So the Sura is expanding this. As they get older, they expand it more, because that's the nature of conscious development. So it's an interesting discourse that is about godly and ungodly, but it's, as I say, the discourse in the West is very different. And my argument would be that thus Hinduism has a lot to offer this discussion. It can look at this discussion from a completely different perspective and bring it to this. It's about who you are and what kind of choices you make and the kind of person you are, who you want to be in the world. And yeah, so anyway, so some points. The Asuras think that they are just a body, pursue gratification without limits. This is against the broader theistic understanding, the four Purusharthas that curtail karma and artha. So that they curtail kama, sense gratification. They curtail artha, economic development. These are necessary in life, but you've got dharma and moksha sandwiching them in. So there's a cycle. So you can't get too religious because you just drive everyone crazy, including yourself. But you can't get too much into sense gratification because you get selfish. You can't get too much into economic development because you just lose all perspective. Again, each one of them, if you focus too much on, you lose all perspective. So they create a balance, these Purusharthas. Interesting process. But they don't recognize, the Asura doesn't recognize the Atma. And this is the crucial point. And this goes back to this second chapter, 12th verse that Krishna discussed. They don't recognize the eternality of the self. And this is a basic philosophical point in Hinduism. And in actual fact, they react more, they look on God as a creator God. And this is much more like the Abrahamic thought, that if God is a creator God, then what about the Holocaust? What about the tsunami? Where was God during these events? Why didn't God stop suffering? Why didn't God stop my sister die? Why didn't God intervene in this level or that level? If there's a creator God, then he's responsible for all this stuff. He created us. And we have to worship him because he created us. So we have to worship him. But that's not what this text in 2.12 says. And this is very interesting. The text in 2.12 says, "Never was there a time when we did not exist, nor you nor will any of us cease to be." So he's telling Arjuna, you are eternally an individual. God didn't create you. Krishna is telling him, I did not create you. Now that's a dynamic theological point, philosophical point. It's very different from Western thinking. So he's saying you're eternally an individual. That means that you have no obligation to me. You're only passing through this body and all that kind of stuff, but eternally, which also sets up, so because the Bhagavad Gita is clearly a bhakti text, it's setting up a relationship with God, a relationship between Arjuna and Krishna. So it's not simply philosophically saying, like the Upanishads, that we are eternal by nature. So eternal means no beginning and no end. We weren't created, right? But it's also saying that in that eternal state, we can have a genuinely loving relationship because you have no obligation to me. Therefore, if you give me your love, it's a pure gift. And that's how love has to be given. You know, if you go up to a girl and you put a gun to her head and say, "Do you love me?" the answer will be invariably yes, as long as you have the gun in your hand. If you're a parent, the child is duty bound to show you respect, if not love. But if they lose love, they have to show you respect because there's a debt to be given. If God created us, we have to worship him out of duty. But in that relationship, you can't have love. So Krishna is saying, I didn't create you, which means they can love each other. That's theologically, that's very interesting, and that's a huge challenge to Christianity, which also is a philosophy of discussing love of God. It's a challenge that hasn't been met yet, but it means that a Hindu atheist is not a Western Christian atheist, because Christian atheists also react to a God who created them. We don't talk about that God. In fact, the creator for us is Brahma. No one worships Brahma. Did you ever see a Brahma temple? There's one in India. That's it. So, no one actually worships the creator, the person who actually is responsible for the creation of the universe, because there are many universes. There are many such creators, and they're all servants of the Supreme. But in terms of us as individuals, we're beyond all that. That's what Krishna is saying. That's very dynamic. But an asura doesn't recognize this philosophical point. Therefore, debars themselves from a relationship with God. Have shrunk their vision to that extent. Okie dokie. And let's see what the time is. Yes, let me wind up actually so we can get into questions and answers. I have a whole lot of stuff about theism, but I think we've made the point. But there's tons of stuff about theism, which is very, very interesting. I suppose what I'd like to end with is that what Krishna did with Arjuna was he laid out theism and he laid out atheism, and then he gave him a choice. And I think that's the important point, because the choice lies with us. Therefore, this is why this is an ongoing discussion, because this is a personal choice that everyone has to make for themselves. And there's kind of no point trying to convince anybody one way or the other in any kind of brutalizing way that I'm an atheist, so you have to be an atheist. And there, as I said, there are evangelical kind of proselytizing atheists in England, very articulate, very intelligent people, but they are out to convince you that there is no God. And there are evangelical religious people out to convince you that there is a God. And interestingly, Krishna doesn't say one way or the other. I find that rather interesting. He says you have to find out for yourself. And very finally, maybe I've mentioned this to you before here, but if we have 3 processes mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, 3 main processes: karma, jnana, and bhakti. Karma is action, jnana is knowledge, and bhakti is devotion or love. Okay? And if we call karma the doy thing, and jnana the thinky thing, and bhakti the feely thing, just so that we bring it down to something manageable. If we see how we make decisions in the world, because we need to understand how to make this choice, and I would say that the process is inherent in the text itself. That Krishna is talking about the doy thing, because we're always doing something, and Krishna says there's never a time when you're not doing something, so you got to get your doy stuff right. So how do you get your doy stuff right? Well, you got to do some of the thinky stuff, because if you just run out and start doy without thinky, then you're going to make a mess, basically. But if you just do thinky and doy, then you can end up like the Nazis. Because the Nazis thought, what do you call him? Hitler, in his Mein Kampf, he wrote that we have to get rid of this religion. We have to get rid of compassion, humility, tolerance, specifically, right? You have to get rid of this out of society because that's a nonsense. He was an atheist. That's total nonsense. He was a very convinced follower of Darwin, of evolutionary theory, to the extreme. So he said it's all about survival of the fittest. So we have to become the fittest. We have to become the Übermensch, the top-class men, and dominate the Untermensch. There's the Slavs and the Jews and all that kind of stuff. And in actual fact, we have to just get rid of them from society. So we have to steel ourselves for this. So he created a thinky thing and a doy thing, because it was only thinky without feely, without compassion, humility, tolerance, the feely bit. Without that, he enabled a sophisticated culture to kill children and women. Innocent people, millions, in their millions, in a factory-like way. brilliant operation of trains, and everyone was involved. And he enabled that to happen because of the thinky bit and the do bit, lack of balance. So you have to have the feely bit, so that when you do the thinky bit, the feely bit's in there as well. It's not just thinking, but it's balanced with compassion, love, devotion, humility, etc. So these three things help us make the right kind of choice. Now, in the evangelical atheism of the Enlightenment in the West, they're saying it's all about rational thought, it's all about scientific, empiric observation, and that's all the thinky bit. I challenge you. Who makes decisions in their life based on the thinky bit? The big decisions in life I'm talking about. The big decisions in life are all about the feely bit. They're all about love. Why do you get married? Because you thought it through? No. Why do you have children? Because you love stool and urine and vomit and being up all hours of the night? No. It's the feeling. It's the look on their face. It's the little chick, chick, chick. When you see a little puppy and you go, ah. That's not a rational thing. Come on. The biggest decisions we make in life are about this. The big thing in life is how to find love. That's our quest, no matter what else no, forget all your philosophy. I know what you want. I can hear the music you're listening to and the films you're watching and the books you're reading. That's what it's all about. So this is a powerful part of life. So we have to get this balance right. We have to understand the function of these three things that are there in the Gita to help us make this kind of decision. But I find that the evangelical atheism that I see is very much devoid of this. It talks about we're all just chemicals and all that kind of stuff. So my wife met an atheist once, and he was arguing like this, and she got so bored, she said, well, if that's the case, right, we're all just chemicals, can I just kill you now? And my wife's a peaceful kind of a person. She believes in ahimsa. But she just, she wanted to bring his philosophy to its ultimate conclusion. Because if we're just chemicals bumping into each other, then what's the need of morality and ethics and all that kind of stuff? You just do whatever you like. Real Charvika stuff. Get ghee. Someone's got ghee. Kill them. Take it. It's just a bunch of chemicals. What's this law all about and all that family stuff? So this is, it's a real discussion. Does the thinky bit have a natural conclusion that you can practice? If it doesn't, it's bogus. It's just like Hitler's stuff. You bring it to its natural conclusion, that means you can kill people. No. Sorry. No, that's not going to work. So these are three things that will help us. So anyway, there's some thoughts on theism and atheism, particularly in reference to the Gita, and I hope I've given you enough challenges there to get a good discussion going.